Dr. Yechiel Leiter, Ambassador of the State of Israel to the United States, welcome to Breitbart News here at the Republican Jewish Coalition, the 40th anniversary. What are your impressions so far after your first visit to this conference?
Well, thank you for having me, Joel. A lot of excitement, a lot of commitment to America First that includes Israel, which is nice to hear after a difficult week when some people tried to drive a wedge between America First agenda and the State of Israel, and even some Jews. So it's nice to hear that the bulwark of the Republican Party sees a partnership between the United States and Israel rather than a recipe for division.
It's interesting and somehow inexplicable, I think, that after you have the great foreign policy successes of this administration from being pro-Israel, essentially, Trump sided with Israel in the Iran war and he helped get the hostages out, somehow now is the moment when there's concern about anti-Semitism. You would think that people who had opposed those policies would be in retreat trying to find a way back, but it's the opposite. They seem to be more vocal. I mean, what do you think is driving that?
Well, anti-Semitism historically has an element of jealousy in it. Look, the level of collaboration between the United States and Israel at present is unprecedented. When we took out the nuclear reactor in Iraq, Iraq in 1981, Reagan administration, which was very sympathetic to Israel, we had a very good relationship. Nevertheless, President Reagan at the time was irate and called Prime Minister Begin out and even threatened him with sanctions. In 2007, when Bush 43 was in the presidency and we took out the nuclear reactor in Syria, we weren't threatened with sanctions, but there wasn't collaboration. And yet, in taking out the Iranian nuclear weaponization program, it wasn't just a matter of Israel flying the F-35s and then the B-2s coming in. There were 4 months of preparation where we were in total collaboration on the preparations for Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer. And it was a stellar success, and it's changed the Middle East. I think some people are troubled by the fact that there's such a close relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Donald Trump, and between the State of Israel and the United States. And I think that may be something which is pushing some people to a point of a frenzied jealousy and into anti-Semitism.
You've had a very tough assignment, and from the beginning, you've had to worry about anti-Semitic violence. 2 of your staff were murdered in cold blood on the streets of Washington, D.C. How has Washington been in this difficult political environment?
Well, one of my top priorities as ambassador, of course, is to try to keep Israel as bipartisan as possible. But it's a hyper-partisan atmosphere in Washington, which makes it very difficult. I mean, I'm here at a Republican Jewish Coalition convention. I'd be happy to go tomorrow to a Democratic Jewish Coalition convention if there was one, if I was invited. But I'm still doing my best, even during the shutdown, to maintain ongoing relationship with the Democratic senators and congressmen. There are many people, I'd still say the majority of the party, that's committed to a relationship with Israel. I think a little bit too much emphasis was placed because of the partisan atmosphere on this humanitarian red herring issue. There was not really an issue of humanitarian aid. We were constantly flooding Gaza with humanitarian aid, and yet we were accosted over this as if we were holding up humanitarian aid. It was a sham. So a little bit too much effort was placed on that. But other than that, I think we will be able to regain, particularly in light of the ceasefire that President Trump has brokered, traditional support among the Democrats as well.
You and I have known each other for a while, and the story is interesting because I was covering the war in Israel. I was there in October 2023, right after the attacks, then in November 2023, and I said, I want to cover a military funeral. So I went that day to Mount Herzl. It was the biggest funeral I've ever been to, and that was the funeral of your son Moshe, who fought and who was killed in combat in Gaza. And we actually covered your speech because you gave part of your speech in English, and you made an appeal to President Biden, let us win the war. Do you feel that you were successful in conveying that message, if not to President Biden, then to the American people?
I think to the American people, I think the fact that we now have a ceasefire that President Trump brokered, which includes the complete release of our hostages, the disarming of Hamas, and the demilitarization of Gaza, which just a few weeks ago were three ideas that were inconceivable. And that is in an agreement that's signed, sealed, delivered, not only between the United States and Israel, but by many of the countries in the region. So, frankly, I thought that we'd destroy the Hamas militarily, but if we destroy Hamas through an agreement in which they completely disarm and are banished from Gaza from ever ruling again, that will mean that we've achieved our goal.
If you could tell us a little bit about some of the personal side of this as well. Obviously, incredibly difficult to lose a son, 6 children, wife. He's beloved by everybody. He was becoming a doctor. Everyone I've ever spoken to who knew him had the highest admiration for him. The war ends with a ceasefire, success for Israel, and yet you are living with that grief still. How do you feel as the parent of a soldier, a reserve soldier who went to fight, about how this ended?
First of all, I don't think it's ended yet. We have a ceasefire. I don't know how it's going to materialize, if it's going to be maintained. We're dealing with a very cruel, ghoulish organization that celebrates murder, celebrates death. I'm not sure they're going to give up on their arms so quickly. But there's a commitment on the United States that they will have to do that. I miss my son desperately. He was my oldest. He was my best friend. He was a celebration of life. At the age of 33, after spending 15 years in special ops in the Air Force, he went on to study medicine. And he actually completed his medical studies, and he received his white jacket in August 2023, just a month and a half before October 7th. And he was supposed to start his rounds in the hospital on October 8th. His life, of course, was changed because of October 7th, like all of Israel. And he chose, despite the fact that he was 39, an MD and the father of 6, he chose to lead the forces of Commando Unit 551, which is the largest division in reserves. He was chosen by the General of Southern Command and asked, actually, to lead the forces because he was so experienced and a field fox. And he was given the assignment on Friday afternoon, it was the 13th day of the war, to find a shaft from which the terrorists were emanating and firing missiles into Ashkelon. And according to the intel, it was supposed to be in the mosque. It wasn't there, but he persisted because he was a persistent officer. And he found the shaft next to the mosque, but it was booby-trapped, a very heavy booby trap. It's a huge explosion, which killed him and 3 of his commandos and blew the legs off 5 of his soldiers on the other side of the wall. So I miss him desperately, but the story of the Jewish people is a story of people who have given their lives for the future. And we're not in a state yet where we can rest on our laurels and just assume that everything will be fine. I mean, you began asking me about anti-Semitism, and who would imagine that just 80 years after Holocaust, we'd have a very popular podcaster in the United States saying that he admires Adolf Hitler. Who could imagine such a thing? Or admire Stalin, who murdered 30 million people. So we still have an awful lot to confront, an awful lot to deal with. We have to take for granted when the Iranian regime of Ayatollah says they are intent on destroying Israel. You know, we're the only country in the world that says thank you when somebody says we recognize your right to exist. Would any other country in the world say, well, thank you? Well, of course we have a right to exist. But too many in the world still see the right of Israel to exist as a question.
Why not admire Israel if you're going to admire a country? You know, it's interesting that they chose Nazi Germany or other countries to admire, but one of the things I find extraordinary about Israel is how happy people are. There's a global happiness index, and since October 7th, Israel fell a few places from, I think, 5th to 8th. Remains a very happy society. We hear about war and conflict, but actually Israelis have happy lives. It's the only Western country with a birth rate above replacement. What is the secret to Israel's happiness in the face of these incredible challenges and the difficulties that families like yours have had to go through? Why do people remain so happy?
Meaning. At the bottom of happiness is meaning. People in Israel understand the meaning of life. I'll give you another statistic, which is even more shocking than the happiness index. All throughout the Western world, birth rates are plummeting. And there is not one Western country with replacement fertility. That means there's not at least 2.1 children per family in order to replace the generations that die out. Israel is the only country in the world with replacement fertility. That's a developed country. If you take a look at the OECD, which is the Organization of Developed Countries, there isn't one, barring Israel, that has replacement fertility, and we're comfortably just above 3. So that's an indication of just how happy we are. Happy people have children, and people who have children are happy. And I think at the root of both is the fact that we have a tremendous sense of meaning and belonging. We came back to the land of Israel after 2,000 years, and there's a cadence to history. And I think when people appreciate that fact, that we're a fulfillment of the hopes and dreams of our grandparents and great-grandparents for 2 millennia, that adds a sense of zest and zeal for everyday life.
So maybe that's the answer to some of the anti-Semitism. I mean, you were born in the United States, and perhaps it's something you can relate to, maybe speak to those who are willing to listen. Maybe it's the meaning that they're lacking, that they might sense that Israel has, that drives some of the jealousy you're talking about. How can Americans who are struggling, let's say, to find a place for their Christian faith or to find a place for the sacrifices they've had to make, whether militarily or some of the struggles they're going through economically, I mean, what's the answer to finding that meaning? If you're speaking to an American audience, different society, larger society, more diverse society, doesn't have the same existential threat every day to give life meaning, and unfortunately that's probably an outcome of conflict, but what would your advice be to Americans looking for meaning that can provide some of that direction that Israel has?
Well, actually, I think Christian America feels meaning, senses meaning, and identifies with Israel. I think the overwhelming majority of Christians in America identify with Israel. I think it's Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, often says that when you come to Israel for the first time, it's as if you're coming home to a place that you realize and recognize. And he's saying that as a devout Christian. We have a very common heritage. We've built Western civilization together. We've gone through ups and downs, but Western civilization is a composite of the Judeo-Christian civilization. And we have an awful lot to talk about. We can debate issues about the first and second coming on a theological basis, but in terms of moral living and what we believe God wants from us in this world in terms of moral living, we agree on. So I think that many Christians, if not most, turn to Israel. There are those trying to drive a wedge, trying to come back with all sorts of replacement theology ideas and so on. But the vast majority aren't there. And you heard Reverend Johnny Moore talk last night, who actually was, I think, the only speaker so far at the conference who spoke from the Bible, right? And he spoke about the portion of the week that the Jews read every week. And we spoke afterwards about the need to have more and more conversations weekly between pastors and rabbis and between just Christians and Jews about the portion of the week. Charlie Kirk started to keep the Shabbat because of his relationship with Jewish friends and understanding what the Shabbat meant to them. So he would put his cell phone in the drawer and wait 25 hours before looking at all his messages. There's so much of that we can discuss and work on together, and I think that the more that Christians look at this miracle that's been fulfilled, where the visions of Isaiah come to life in the hills of Judea, that they'll find meaning and they'll relate to Israel. And I think most of them are there, and that's why we do have such a close relationship. There's an arc of covenant that runs from Middle America to Judea and Samaria and to Jerusalem. And I think that's where the majority of Israelis and Americans are, and that's why we have this level of collaboration that we've never had before.
Let's talk about Judea and Samaria for a moment. That's where some of the unresolved questions about the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians still live, and it's sometimes difficult to understand what's going on there. What is the future of Judea and Samaria?
Well, for many years we've been in this mode of trying to create a Palestinian state. You know, everybody repeats ad nauseum, the two-state solution, the two-state solution. Well, we tried two states, and we found that it's not a solution. All we received was terrorism. The whole idea of the Oslo Accords was to move towards a Palestinian state. Now look, Israel is a very narrow country. We're 40 miles wide with Judea and Samaria. So if we were to cut Judea and Samaria in half, or go back to the 1967 line, we'd be left with a country 9 miles wide. Now really, after what we've experienced, is that going to get us safety? I mean, is that going to get Israel safety? Is it going to get the nascent Palestinian state safety? And when we turned Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority, it fell into the hands of Hamas. So we've got to come up with a different formula. And there's nothing I'd like more than to see the economic development, the betterment of Palestinian society, which has to include, of course, reform from within. We can't reform Palestinian society where they actually pay the families of terrorists for committing acts of violence. So were that to change, and the corruption to change, I mean, look, third world countries have been trying to, or at least it's been trying to be imposed on them for so many years to clean up the issue of corruption, right? We have a corrupt system within the Palestinian Authority where people are stealing money of Western countries that are pumping aid in. Many people are becoming millionaires where the majority of the people are left without anything. So there are a lot of issues that we have to iron out. We have to unpack them, and I think we can work together, but we've got to find a different mechanism. The repetition ad rote of Palestinian state, every kind of bows down in front of the two-state solution mantra. It's not going to get us anywhere. We have to start thinking out of the box and changing direction, and it's going to be to the betterment of everybody.
Do you find that there's interest among ambassadors from Arab countries that you encounter in D.C., if you do encounter them, if you meet them at the White House or on social occasions? Do you find there's an interest in relationships with Israel?
Not public. There's tremendous interest in relationship with Israel, but just off the radar screen. They're not ready for that yet. And I think we may move back into the Abraham Accord mode, hopefully 2.0, when we'll be able to put it on radar as well. Because that was the magic of the Abraham Accords. It was, let's just get together, accommodate each other without making demands about Israel dividing Jerusalem or creating a Palestinian state or whatever. It was, let's work together to better the region. And I think that U.S. foreign policy is going to encourage that now, because the U.S. wants to lower its footprint, in its military footprint at least, in the Middle East. The more that there's cooperation between Israel and the Arab states, the easier it's going to be for the U.S. to do that. I mean, look, in Europe, the U.S. has NATO. It's got to move to the Far East because there's no equivalent of NATO. The Mideast could have something along the lines of a NATO or the Abraham Accords to move into the next phase. So there's no reason in the world why countries like Saudi Arabia would not work alongside of us to guarantee stability in the region against the extremists of Iran and Iranian proxies. So look, after Israel, the biggest round of applause for what we did in Iran took place in Riyadh and the other moderate Arab countries, because they're threatened by an Iranian nuclear weaponization program just as much as we are.
Last question. We often talk about foreign policy and war and the military issues. What are the most interesting issues outside of those areas that you're working on, or the most fruitful areas for cooperation between Israel and the U.S., whether they're economic or cultural? What is most interesting and exciting to you about the relationship?
One thing that the Prime Minister talks about all the time is collaboration on AI. I mean, that's where we're moving into this new world of AI, and we have very, very superior technology in Israel. Much of it a result of our need to maintain our defensive posture. But if we collaborate on this, 1 + 1 is going to equal 5. So we're working on that. And similarly, the whole issue of Golden Dome and missile protection, missile defense. In Operation Rising Lion, we got hit with ballistic missiles from Iran. the different systems that were put in place, the Israeli system of David Sling and Iron Dome, together with the THAAD and Aegis systems of the United States, we were able to keep almost 90% of the ballistic missiles out of Israel. We still got hit with 10%. It's not hermetic. We couldn't hermetically seal the skies, but we saved thousands and thousands of lives. In every occasion I have here in the U.S. in front of every group, I thank the people of America for providing us with the THAAD and Aegis missiles, which are very, very efficient, expensive, but very efficient missile defense systems. So we need to ensure that the U.S. has a Golden Dome, and we need to share our technology with the U.S. And the whole issue, third point I would say, is the whole issue of food insecurity. There's still 900 million people around the world that go to sleep hungry every night. And we have all the solutions today. We just have to apply them. So instead of throwing money at USAID, which was, went down the drain, we can collaborate to create a situation where people in underdeveloped countries, Africa, South America, could benefit from the technology that we have. When I came to Israel in 1978, I came to a dormitory and I was told that I had 90 seconds in the shower because there was no water. We had a terrible water shortage. And today we're a net water exporter, okay? We export water to Jordan and to the Palestinian territories. So this is, it's huge. And 87% of our industrial water is wastewater that's recycled. That's the highest rate in the world. So we have an awful lot to give in terms of greenhouse technology, seed strength for the development of seeds in areas with difficult climates, water pressure, water purification, and so on. So I think the more we collaborate, the more we're going to be able to make effective change in the world for the better.
Ambassador Leiter, thanks for joining us at Breitbart News here at the RJC.
Good to be with you, Joel.